The story begins with a famous young boxer named Young. At just 16 years old, he had already become very popular in his city due to his exceptional skills. One night, after winning a match, Young was eager to return home because his mother and sister were waiting for him. However, as soon as he reached home, he was met with a horrifying sight: the dead bodies of his mother and sister lying there. Suddenly, a man attacked him from behind, but since Young was a trained boxer, he defended himself easily and ended up killing the attacker. 2 years later, a group of boys in a school were discussing Young's story. They mentioned that the people who attacked his family were thieves, but despite this, Young had killed them all using his boxing skill. This led to him being accused of murder and sent to jail. In that same class was a boy named Sobin, who had recently transferred to the school. Sobin had been severely bullied in his previous school, which was why he changed school. Slowly, he started to like his new school, but then their teacher introduced a new student to the class, Tony. Tony was also a boxer and, coincidentally, the same boy who had bullied Sobin in his previous school. The moment Sobin saw Tony, he was terrified. As soon as the teacher left the class, Tony began asserting his dominance by beating up a few students for no reason. Then, he turned his attention to Sobin. Sobin, paralyzed by fear, couldn't say anything, so one of his friends stepped in to protect him. But Tony shoved the friend aside and raised his hand to slap her. That's when Sobin, for the first time in his life, mustered the courage to stop Tony. However, Sobin's newfound bravery only enraged Tony further, and he decided to teach Sobin a lesson. Sobin, desperate to defend himself, picked up a pen, but Tony wasn't intimidated. In fact, Tony mocked him, repeatedly shouting, "Hit me! Come on! Hit me, you weakling!" Feeling trapped, Sobin, without thinking, stabbed the pen into Tony's eye. This incident led to Sobin being charged with attempted murder. However, in court, Sobin couldn't say anything in his defense against Tony, resulting in him being sentenced to 2 years in prison. On the bus to the prison, fate had Sobin seated next to none other than Young. Upon arrival, all prisoners were assigned to different cells. Sobin was placed in a cell with Min, a thief. There, another inmate shared some of the secrets of the prison. The prison was ruled by 3 big names: June, Ak, and Han. Among them, June was a good man who tried to stop Ak and Han from harassing other prisoners. However, Ak and Han recently framed June, causing the authorities to isolate him in a separate room. Since then, Ak and Han had been making life miserable for everyone. Despite this, the most feared prisoner in the facility was still Young, though he never fought without a reason. The next day, Sobin and Min were quietly observing a football match between Ak and Han's teams. During the game, 2 players got injured, so Han called Sobin and Min to join the game. Both reluctantly agreed, but since Sobin wasn't good at football, Han's team started losing. Han, unwilling to take responsibility for the loss, closed his eyes and blindly kicked the ball, which accidentally hit Ak between his legs. In excruciating pain, Ak fell to the ground. Furious, Ak's men dragged Sobin toward their cell. Sobin was petrified, his mind flashing back to the tortures he endured at his previous school. He started begging for mercy, but Ak's men were unmoved. Just then, they noticed Young passing by. The sight of him immediately changed their behavior, and they pretended to be friendly with Sobin. Realizing that everyone in the prison feared Young, Sobin ran toward him for protection. Although Young usually stayed out of trouble, seeing Sobin's desperate plea moved him to help. When Ak's men tried to intervene, Young knocked one of them down with a single punch. In prison, inmates were also given classes. During one such class, Ak couldn't stop glaring at Sobin, determined to take revenge. After class, a guard took Sobin to meet someone. To his shock, it was Tony, the same boy whose eye he had injured. Tony's life had taken a downward spiral. He had been expelled from school, lost his eye, and now lived on the streets. Tony blamed all of it on Sobin and was intent on killing him. Hearing this, Sobin, as usual, began begging for his life, but Tony remained unfazed. During one of the classes, Sobin noticed Young training in the yard. Watching him, Sobin realized that he had 2 years left before his release, and if he could learn boxing, he might be able to protect himself. He immediately approached Young, asking him to become his trainer. At first, Young refused, suspecting that Sobin might misuse his skill. But when Sobin shared the details of his past, Young believed that Sobin would never walk the wrong path. He decided to help Sobin, but only after he passed a test, running 100 laps around the prison ground in 40 minutes. For Sobin, this training meant everything. He started running without hesitation, his mind consumed by the memories of all the abuse he had endured. Determined to change his fate, he pushed himself to the limit, ready to collapse but unwilling to stop. In the final few rounds of his test, Sobin was completely exhausted. Seeing this, Young told him to stop, but Sobin was determined to pass the test and didn't stop until he completed all 100 laps. By the time he finished, he was so tired that he was about to collapse to the ground, but Young caught him just in time. Seeing his condition, Young understood how important learning boxing was for Sobin and decided to help him. To start, he requested the jailer to shift Sobin into his cell. The jailer, who was also a fan of Young and knew he wasn't a bad person, agreed to the request and immediately shifted Sobin to Young's room. The next day, Young began training Sobin. However, seeing Sobin's weak physical condition, Young realized it would take a lot of effort to train him. Meanwhile, Ak was also plotting his revenge but was reminded by his men about Min, who had been with Sobin that day. They decided that perhaps they could use Min to separate Sobin from Young. During training, Sobin was so exhausted that he wanted to rest, but Young reminded him that with such an attitude, he could never learn boxing. Hearing this, Sobin pushed himself to keep exercising. Over the next several days, Sobin worked tirelessly, and gradually, his body began to transform. During this time, Sobin and Young also developed a strong friendship. Meanwhile, outside the prison, Tony started fighting with various thugs in the city. During one of these fights, a prominent gangster noticed him and offered him work after seeing his skill. However, Tony wasn't interested and insulted the gangster, who retaliated by slapping him to the ground. The gangster then gave Tony one last chance to accept the offer. Desperate for money, Tony eventually agreed to work for the gangster. Back in the prison, during lunch, Min told Sobin that in a few days, Young would be transferred to a high-security prison for more dangerous criminal. This news devastated Sobin, as Young hadn't told him anything about it. Sobin immediately confronted Young, who explained that sooner or later, Sobin would have to learn to fight for himself, and that time was approaching quickly. Taking his words to heart, Sobin resumed his training with even more dedication. Meanwhile, Ak's men started harassing Min. When Sobin arrived, they tried to intimidate him too, but Sobin used his newly acquired boxing skills to fight them off. When Ak heard about this, he ordered his men to bring Sobin to him immediately. However, the men were now so scared of Sobin that they instead went to him for help. Realizing this, Sobin decided to confront Ak on his own. When Sobin met Ak, the first thing he did was apologize for his mistakes, but Ak was unmoved and immediately attacked him. However, Sobin was no longer the same person. He fought back, but Ak was still stronger and managed to knock Sobin to the ground with all his might. Everyone thought the fight was over, but suddenly Sobin got back up. This time, he fought Ak ferociously and didn't stop until Young intervened and stopped him. Afterward, Sobin and Young quietly left the scene. Outside the prison, Tony's reputation was growing rapidly. He was becoming more dangerous by the day. Back in the prison, during his final training session with Young, Sobin almost landed a punch on Young's face. With that session, their time together ended, as Young was to be transferred to another prison that day. Before leaving, Young advised Sobin to keep working hard. Shortly after Young left, June, the good inmate, was also released from prison. This meant that no one in the prison was left to bother anyone. However, Han challenged Sobin to a fight with the condition that if Sobin won, Han would stop harassing anyone in the prison. They decided to hold the fight 5 days later. Meanwhile, Tony visited Sobin again because rumors of Sobin's training had spread even outside the prison. However, Tony was not intimidated. Instead, he was happy, knowing their fight would now be a worthy contest. On the day of the fight, Sobin and Han faced off in a nail-biting match. Both fought fiercely, but Sobin's hard work paid off. Han couldn't last long against Sobin's relentless attacks and eventually admitted defeat. True to his word, Han promised never to harass anyone again. From that day onward, peace returned to the prison, and many of the leaders even became good friends over time. In this way, Sobin's 2 years in prison came to an end. Upon his release, the first person he encountered was Tony, who didn't say a word before launching an attack. During their fight, both showed remarkable agility, dodging each other's punches effortlessly. However, after some time, Tony began overpowering Sobin just like before. Lying on the ground, Sobin suddenly remembered Young's face. This memory gave him the strength to get back up and fight again. This time, Sobin used a special technique taught by Young and landed a punch so powerful that Tony couldn't stand back up, no matter how hard he tried. After defeating Tony, Sobin silently walked away. Despite being far apart, Sobin and Young's friendship remained strong. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one.